Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. I should just share my screen. Okay. Right. There we go. So yeah, my name is Fern Carroll-Smith and I work for the National Wildflower Centre at the Eden Project. And I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to botany today. I'm going to kind of take you through the tools that you can use to get more into botany yourself, rather than just showing you pictures of wildflowers. That's great. I tend to find when somebody if you ask somebody what the name of something is and they tell you, you tend to forget it 10 seconds later. So the best thing is to teach a man to fish, as it were, and sort it out for himself. So I'll just give you a little overview. So the National Wildflower Centre has been at the Eden Project since 2017. Currently, we've got 4 members of staff. There's myself, I run the seed bank, which is based in Cornwall. Stephanie Knight, who is our project manager based in Cornwall, Richard Scott, who is our technical director, who's based in Liverpool, and Lucy Benger, who is our project manager in Scotland. The National Wildflower Centre was another Millennium project set up by the charity Land Life. Eden was also a Millennium project. It ran out of money in 2017 and was rescued by Eden and continues its work from its new Cornwall base. So really, what is botany? It's the study of all of these elements of plants, effectively, whether that's physiology, structure, genetics, it can be chemistry, ecology, distribution, classification, and economic importance is generally the thing that a lot of people are focused on. Almost everything we use comes from plants in one way or another, even the tires on your car, which is so it's very important to know what you're looking at. But the thing that we're going to focus on today is identification. So we're going to cover a little bit of taxonomy. I appreciate that some of you might not know about the structures of plant names. If you're a gardener, you might recognise some plant names and how they're structured and plant families. We're going to talk about flower parts. That can get quite in depth, but you just need to be aware that all these parts are there, and hopefully once you get to looking at things yourself a bit more, you might just what I've told you might, when you're looking at a key or something, you might jog a memory for you, just so you recognise some of these words really. And having a look at some family features and how you start to work out something that you've got no idea what it is, which is a real challenge when you're a beginner because you often haven't got a lot of frame of reference. And then I've got some book recommendations and resources. And when you're doing botany, you'll do a lot of this, which is squinting in a strange way at things. My partner took this photo because he found it so hilarious that I was squinting at this plant. So first of all, we'll have a little discussion about taxonomy. So when we are trying to identify plants, predominantly what the first step that we take is finding out what family they're in. And this is a taxonomic tree here of corn, which is ZMAs, and effectively it breaks down plants into smaller and smaller categories until you end up in a single species. So the kingdom is Plantae, plants. All of our plants are in here, and then it goes down to the phylum, class, order. You don't need to worry about this too much. The three that are important to us are the family, which is Poaceae, the genus, which is Zea, and the species, which is ZMAs. I often, so plants have families like we have families. I would say that the family in this sense is the extended family. If I was corn, my surname, effectively, if I was corn, my genus would be Carroll-Smith, because that's my close family, and the species would be Fern, and my extended family might be a maiden name or something a bit further back. But yes, plants have families just like we do, and all species have a family, a genus, and a species. And what we're trying to do is get down to that specific species. This is how plant names are arranged. So your family now always ends with AC. So if you see that at the end of a group, you know that that's a family. So you might have the Rosaceae, which is the rose family, or the Fabaceae, which is the pea family. Then you have the genus, the wider group, your specific species, and you can also have subgroups like var, and you may have a variety. It might be var alba, which is a white variety of something. And you can also have in commas here a cultivar. So a cultivar is a horticultural plant that has been bred. It's a cultivated variety. So if you're working with wild plants, you won't see those often, but if you're a gardener, you will. And this is just one of the labels that we have at Eden. You can see that the family's at the bottom here, and then we've got the common name as well. It is important to try and use Latin names or scientific names where possible instead of common names, because common names can cause confusion. You can have, most plants have several common names. There's a plant called bird's foot trefoil, which is Lotus corniculatus. So its common name is bird's foot trefoil. But I also heard one today, it was called grandma's toenails, which is interesting. If you make sure that you use scientific names rather than common names, everybody knows what you're talking about. The other good example is if I said that I was looking at a bluebell in England, I would probably be looking at Hyacinthioides non-scripta, at English bluebell. But if you were in Scotland and said that you had seen a bluebell, you would be meaning Campanula rotundifolia, which is a completely different genus and a different family, actually. And the other advantage of scientific names over common names is that scientific names are universal all the world over. So if you were talking to a botanist in a completely different country, spoke a different language to you, the name for that plant would still be the same. So we'll get a little bit into flower structure. So when you're identifying plants, one of the most important things is to look very closely at the flowers. Most identification guides use the flowers as the primary way that they identify the plant. This isn't universal. We are very, very lucky in the UK to have a guide for vegetative characteristics as well. But generally, you'll be looking at flowers. And actually, when you're going around looking for plants, when you first start, it can be quite hard to spot plants when they aren't in flower in a way. It's the flowers that really distinguish that that's something you haven't seen before and something interesting. So first of all, we've got the pedicel, which is the flower stalk, the stalk of an individual flower. If this were many flowers all bunched together and then there was another stalk underneath, that would be called the peduncle. Then at the bottom of the flower, we have the sepals or the calyx, and those are the green bit that you get behind the flower. So if you think of a strawberry, when you have a green bit on top of the strawberry, those are the sepals that are left over from when the strawberry was flowering. And you have the receptacle, which is effectively a swollen part at the base of the flower that all of the petals and all the other organs sit on. It's not always very obvious. The ones that do have distinctive receptacles are often the rose family, and the Asteraceae, the daisy family, their receptacle is called a capitulum, and that's diagnostic for that family. Then we have the petals here, which are nicely coloured in blue. I will say this isn't a real flower. This is one of those nice pretend, nice and clear flower that I've drawn for you. But yeah, we have the petals here in blue, also called the corolla. So the corolla is the collective term for the petals, and the calyx is the collective term for the sepals. Then we have all the female parts of the flower here called the gynecium. So we have the ovary, which is when fertilized, that's what will become the seeds. The style, which is the tube that connects the ovary to the stigma, and the stigma is the part that receives pollen. Then we also have the male part of the flower called the andrecium, with the anther, which is the bit that produces the pollen, and the filament, which is the stalk that attaches it to the rest of the flower. The andrecium can also be called the stamen. And this is all these parts labelled on a real flower. So the primary difference that you might be able to recognise here is that this flower is upside down, and that's because this is a fuchsia that I've cut in half, and fuchsias actually hang down. So the connection point is at the top, and the flowers hang down rather than that flower that you illustrated that was up like this. So we've got our pedestal, our stalk, and then this nice green part here is the ovary, which is in the receptacle, which would be around the bottom surrounding the ovary. And interestingly here, our sepals are not green, so you may not initially think that they are sepals, but I know that they're sepals because there are no sepals behind them. If there were green sepals behind them, I would say that these are petals, but because there's none behind them, I know that these are sepals, and they have just evolved to look like petals. It's just an advantage to the plant. It's got more attractive features that attract pollinators, and also this is a cultivated variety, so will have been bred to look this attractive. And we have the petals down here as well. Then we have the filament and the anther, which makes up the stamen or the andrecium, and the style and the stigma. So style, stigma, and ovary make up the female organs of the flower or the gynecium. Interestingly, with sepals, if you have parts of a flower and you don't know if they're sepals and petals, the collective term is tepals. I know that if I were counting them, for instance, here I can see that I've got 2 sepals still attached to this plant and 3 petals because they're very different. But in some plants, they look exactly the same. So tulips, for example, they have 6 tepals. Three of those are actually sepals that have evolved to look like petals, and 3 are true petals. Another important part of flower structure is where the ovary sits in relation to the petals. So this is when you go through a key and you're trying to identify plants, you can often quite early on get a question whether the ovary is superior or inferior. And if you haven't heard of that before, it can really stump you. And also all these terms, please remember, you don't have to remember this off the top of your head. I have taught quite a few lectures on plant parts and botany at work, and I still get them the wrong way around. Sometimes I have to look it up. That's totally fine. You don't have to remember it all. But the main thing, and what I'm trying to get across in this talk, is that you recognize these terms so that when they come up, you don't think, I have absolutely no idea what that is. I have had enough. I'm going to throw the key in the corner and walk away. I want to give you the power to recognize them and carry on. So first of all, the ovary, if the ovary is superior, that means that is the ovary, the petals are attached below the ovary here. So this is the ovary and all the female parts. If the ovary is half inferior, it's kind of half sits in a cup. That's not very common, but that is diagnostic for the rose family. But it can look like they have a inferior or superior ovary sometimes. So that's one you have to kind of get to know. But if you know you're looking at something in the rose family, then you might know, you kind of know to answer it as half inferior. An inferior ovary is where the petals are attached above the ovary point. This is easier to see sometimes in fruit than it is in flower. If I were to go back to fuchsia, we can see that the ovary is below the attachment point for the petals and the sepals. So that is an inferior ovary. Yes, so when you look at fruit, you can infer this from the remains of the calyx, which is the collective term for the sepals. So for instance here, we've got a pomegranate. So this is an inferior ovary, and I can tell this because this is the pedicel here, which would have attached the flower to the rest of the plant. And this is the remains of the calyx. So this part here is where the petals would have come out of. And I can see that this is the ovary, which is swollen to produce fruit. So this is an inferior ovary. In comparison, in tomatoes, this is our calyx here. This is the remains of the sepals. So I know that the petals would have been coming out at that point, and the fruit has developed in front of the petals. So that is a superior ovary. And parts of the gynecium can vary as well. The different arrangements can indicate different families. So in a simple sense, if your carpels are completely free, so you have one ovary, one stigma, one style, one stigma, one style per ovary, those are free carpels, and you can have many of them, that's fine, but it just means that they're not all fused in together. And that's common in the buttercup family, the Ranunculacy. They're quite an old family, the buttercups. They are, yes, one of our oldest families. So they were one of the first families to evolve effectively. So they still have quite a simple structure. You tend to find that as plants become more complex, they've evolved more recently. I mean, when I say recently, we're still talking like hundreds of thousands of years. But orchids are one of our most recent families to evolve, and they've got very complex flowers. Ranunculacy are the oldest, and they're very simple flowers. And that's actually good to know, because most keys are not ordered by they're not ordered by alphabetical order. They're ordered by the way that the order that the plants evolved in. So you tend to end up with Ranunculacy as being one of your first families, and maybe things before that have evolved before Ranunculacy, like the conifers. They're much older. Conifers are older than flowering plants. And you end up with orchids at the end. And interestingly, if you have a look at the carpels, the female parts of a ranunculus, they've got a kind of pine cone look to them, and that's because they actually were one of the first plants to evolve first families to evolve flowering, and also magnolias were one of our first plants to evolve flowering, and the center of magnolia looks like a pine cone, so it's evolved from gymnosperms, which have pine cones and don't flower. And interestingly, magnolias actually evolved before there were bees, which is why they're beetle pollinated and not bee pollinated. So back onto ovaries, sorry, I got a bit of a tangent there. So you can have a compound ovary. So this is you've got 3 stigmas and styles here. So there will be 3 ovaries and sections here, but the ovary has all fused together. Or you can have the ovaries have all fused together and the style has fused together, but the stigmas are all free. Or you can have that everything has fused together into one unit. And in that case, if it were asking how many ovaries there are, you might either like to cut across this section and you might see 3 different lobes or kind of cells where the ovaries are, or you can count the little nodules on the top here, the stigma, and there should be 3 of those. If you've got 3 ovaries, you tend to have 1 stigma lobe per ovary. Symmetry is another aspect that's important. We call this regular or irregular, or actinomorphic or zygomorphic. I should have warned you earlier, though you might have picked up by now. Botanists do like to frequently have 2 names for the same thing. If we can make things a bit harder, we will. Sometimes in America as well, they have different names for the flower part. But you can call these regular or irregular, or actinomorphic or zygomorphic. Regular flowers have more than 1 plane of symmetry, and I tend to think they're what you would get if you asked a child to draw a flower. Zygomorphic or irregular flowers have only 1 plane of symmetry, so they can only be folded in half on 1 plane. And things like orchids are zygomorphic and the Pea family is zygomorphic. But again, it's a question that you can quite quickly use to split families, because families tend to just be one or the other. I've not come across an instance yet where you've got both actinomorphic and zygomorphic flowers in the same family. And then there are also several types of inflorescence shape. So if you're talking about 1 flower, that's fine. But the inflorescence is the way that many flowers are structured on the plant. So we have a Titan arum plant at Eden. I don't know if any of you have seen it. We do have them flowering fairly regularly. They also have them at Kew and Edinburgh Botanic Gardens, and they're often written about in the media as the largest flower in the world, but that's not true, because they are actually an inflorescence. The flowers are incredibly tiny, and you end up with you have 1 spike and modified sepals. It's actually the largest inflorescence in the world. The biggest individual flower is Rafflesia, which is a tropical plant which smells like rotting meat to attract flies in to pollinate it. The Titan arum does that as well. So generally, you don't have to be too specific with these shapes. It can be very hard to tell them apart. The groups that are very specific about the inflorescence shapes are the grasses. So if that's a raceme, a spike, or a panicle in a grass, that can be very diagnostic. But I would say that probably you're not going to be looking at grasses too closely, and that's a whole other thing. They don't look like anything else. You really have to get your hand ends out for those. A capitulum is diagnostic of the aster family. So that's where you have a flat head with lots of little flowers on it. So if you think of a daisy, that's a capitulum. So it's a compound flower. So it's got many small flowers. And an umbel is diagnostic of the Apiaceae, which is the carrot family. So that's a large flat flower head. Those big white ones that you might see, like cow parsley or hogweed, are all in the Apiaceae family. And we have similar, the same as flowers, we have various different names for the parts of a leaf. And these can all come in different shapes, which all have their own names. But just be aware that if they're talking about the leaf lamina, they mean the leaf blade. So that's the whole leaf, the flat part. The apex is the top, the base is the base, that one's nice and easy. And then we have a petiole, which is the leaf stem, the margin. The midrib is the central vein in the leaf. A node is the point where the leaf attaches to the stem, and it's often swollen and has a stipule at the base. And a stipule, they're not always present, but often are. And it's like a small leafy outgrowth at the base of a leaf, a node. Sometimes they can be very large. In some members of the pea family, they're very big, and they're very diagnostic in the pea family. But as I say, they're not always present, and sometimes they can just be a little scar or a little black dot, that kind of thing. But just be aware, if you see something about stipules, you've got to think, right, stipules has got something to do with leaves. I know where I should be looking. And leaf arrangement is very important. It's really good to get very familiar with this. Maybe when you're going out, walking around, looking at your wildflowers, even if you just start by looking at them and saying, oh, are these opposite or alternate or whorled leaves? So opposite leaves come in pairs, and they come in pairs on either side of the stem. And alternate, you have one on one side, one on the other, one on one side, one on the other. Whorls are where you've got more than two leaves joining at one point, and that's common in cleavers. You might also know them as goosegrass, sticky willy. That's the problem with the common names. Their name is Gallium aparine, and they have whorls of leaves. If you want to see what a whorl looks like when you're out and about in the wild, it's those plants that kids always stick to each other when they're going home from school. And the veins as well. So we've got palmately veined, would be veined as in the palm of your hand. So you've got a point at the base that all of the veins come out of. I've got a point down here that all of my finger tendons come out of, for instance. Pinnately veined is what you would get, again, if you asked a child to draw a leaf, they would draw one vein up the middle and lots of little branches coming off the side. And parallel veins are when all the veins in the leaf are parallel, and that's diagnostic for the grass family and the iris family. They're parallel veined. This is worth taking a little bit of time over, and I would recommend that you again try and have a little look when you're out and about and try and work out whether things are pinnate or not. Maybe have a look back at this slide on the talk as we're being recorded. Pinnate is when you have when a leaf is divided into what looks like many leaves. And it can be a little bit difficult to get your head around. You need to have a look at a few specimens. But effectively, this whole unit here is a leaf. Each of these units that I've drawn is one leaf, even though it contains what looks like many little leaves. They're actually leaflets. And you can tell the difference between a leaf and a leaflet because leaves will always have buds at the base of them, and they may have stipules. Leaflets don't ever have buds or stipules. That can, as I say, you're going to have to look closely and just be aware. But it's very important for when you're identifying things that are pinnate, that when they're asking about the leaf, you're not looking at one of these individual small structures, because what they're asking about is this whole unit. And you can quite easily misidentify things if you're not aware of that. And I did make that mistake when I was first starting. So the level of pinnateness is dependent on how many times the leaf is divided. I don't believe that we've got anything in the UK that's more than tripinnate. I think there are some tropical ferns that can go up to 8 times pinnate, But yes, we're reasonably lucky in the UK. So palmate is when it's palmately pinnate, as again like a palm of our hand. Once pinnate divided once, bipinnate divided twice, tripinnate divided 3 times. If you're trying to work that out when you're in the field, the best thing to do is to take off one leaf. So say we took off this one whole structure here, and then try to remove another subunit. And see how many subunits you can remove without damaging any other part of the plant. So in this instance, I could remove this unit here, but I couldn't then break that up into smaller units without just tearing the leaflet apart. So that would be once pinnate. In this instance, I could remove this subunit, this branch on the side, and then one more. But after that, I would have to be tearing the leaf up. So we're bipinnate. And on this one, I would remove one subunit, 2 subunits here, and I could remove that little leaflet. So that would be 3 subunits, tripinnate. Have a little go at it when you're out and about. Particularly ferns can be quite good because they have lots of different levels of pinnateness. So I'll just talk a little bit about family groups here. So I've mentioned them before, and they are getting to know certain plant families is definitely the best way to get started in botany. So all plants are in families, and the family groups are diagnostic often. So when you're starting to use a key, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but a key is effectively a book that helps you identify your plant. If you start from the beginning every single time, you are more likely to go wrong. So what happens in a key generally is that you answer pairs of questions and it sends you down. If you haven't down the key till you get to your species. If you haven't used a key before, it's a little bit like those books that they used to have, where it's like you build your own story and you decide which way you want to go. Like, am I going to go right? Am I going to go left? Am I, that kind of thing. And you end up at a fixed point. As I say, if you start at the beginning every time, you've got a lot of margin for error there. You might be answering 35 questions before you get down to your species. What you want to do is be able to skip the queue and get to the section that you need. And the way to do that is by learning what different plant families look like. So the Brassicaceae is a common family. There's a lot of it out on flowering now, likes to flower in midsummer. And they have 4 cross-shaped petals. The old name for this family is Cruciferae, because of the crucifix, because they're cross-shaped. They have in their seed pods, which are here, they have a translucent septum, which when the seed pods open, they have this translucent bit of tissue that the seeds are attached to at the middle. And they often have a cabbagey or mustard-like smell, and they're quite often hairy as well. But the main thing is, if you see a plant with 4 petals that's in this kind of slightly lobed shape like this, it's probably in the Brassica family. They're not all yellow. They can be white or purple as well. If any of you are familiar with the plant cuckoo flower, which flowers in spring, often in damp places, that is in the Brassica family. The next family is Ranunculacy, which we talked a little bit earlier, about a little bit earlier, with its many free carpels. And that has alternate leaves, which means there's one on the left, and then a bit higher, one on the right, one on the left, one on the right. And the flower has large, distinct petals. So it's a very obvious flower. And the stamens and carpels are all free. So because it's a very old family, nothing is fused. It's less specialized. And we have quite a few species of buttercup in the UK. So not everything in this family is a buttercup. Clematis are also in the Ranunculaceae, which is quite interesting. But we have quite a few species of buttercup in the UK. And unfortunately, all the flowers look exactly the same. So if you want to identify your buttercups, you're going to have to be looking at leaf features a bit more than anything else. We have the Caryophyllaceae. So this family contains some really beautiful wildflowers that often take us right the way through the year. So we've got red campion here, ragged robin, which looks like red campion that's been caught in a storm, in my opinion, and a little stitchwort as well. And the thing that's very diagnostic for this family is that they have simple leaves. So when I say simple, that means that they're not pinnate in any way. They just have a regular normal leaf, and in opposite pairs of the stem. And the flowers are often notched in this way. So if you'll notice this red campion, each petal has a notch in the middle. So does the stitchwort, and so does this ragged robin, but the ragged robin is even more divided. And the flowers are in cymes, but that's I don't think that's quite so diagnostic as the petals. Generally, you'll see plants like this a lot in spring in the hedgerows. And we have the Apiaceae, which is the carrot family. Their inflorescence is an umbel, which we spoke about earlier, which is like an umbrella. So which is nice and easy. That was very nice of somebody to name it that like that. So if you think of an umbrella, if you get your umbrella caught in the wind and it goes and sticks out the wrong way, that's what an umbel looks like. So this is the flower here of this plant. And they have alternate leaves that are pinnate. So as you can see here, this is one of our leaf sections, and then we could take another one off. They often vary between once or twice pinnate. Some are 3 times pinnate. And they have these little seeds as well that look like they have little beetle antenna in the top. This is a very important family for several reasons. If any of you want to get into botany for foraging, you need to be careful of this family. It contains some of our most poisonous plants in the UK. So hogweed is in this family, as is hemlock and hemlock water dropwort. Also, wild carrot and wild celery are in this group. All of the flowers tend to look pretty similar. That's the thing. They're all generally white umbels. Sometimes they're a bit yellower or greener, but all of the flowers look similar. So you need to get familiar with leaf features and some of the more delicate flower features. So I wouldn't recommend, until you're a more confident botanist, doing any foraging in this family until you're absolutely sure you know what you're identifying. Hemlock water dropwort in particular does not have a cure and is often mistaken for wild celery, but wild celery has a very distinctive celery smell to it. The thing is, if you eat hemlock water dropwort, they basically just have to put you on a drip and hope that you work it out yourself. There's not much they can give you otherwise, and it is our most common case of poisoning, I believe. So just be aware, but they are a lovely family. And hogweed, again, lovely, great for pollinators. Giant hogweed is invasive to the UK, but regular hogweed is native. You just need to be careful, because if you get the sap on your skin, it will make you very sensitive to the sun, and then it gives you blisters where the sap has been, and it makes you sensitive to the sun forevermore. So just a family to be careful of, but also still worth looking at. And we have the family. So these are the pea family. They often have pinnate leaves, as you can see down here on this lovely little tufted veg. And the leaves quite often have a little tendril at the end. So if you grow sweet peas, you'll recognise the tendrils, or peas or beans in your garden. But there are some things that people don't expect to be in this family as well, like the clovers. This is red clover here. And the leaves aren't always pinnate. The leaf is trifoliate. It's split into 3. Their main distinctive feature is that the peas will always have a pea flower structure, and that is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. What does the pea family look like? They look like peas. Thank you. Excellent. Very helpful. But even if you look at the clovers, you can see that they don't have a standard regular flower structure. They have this irregular structure. And the petals in the pea family have slightly different names. At the top, you have the standard, which is your largest petal. Then you have the wing petals, the keel in the middle, which is made up of 2 petals that are fused. And inside the keel, which I've illustrated here, are all of the reproductive structures. And when a bee pollinates these, it has to force its way in between the wing and the keel. Yes, so we have a lot of clovers and a lot of lovely little vetches and things in this family. A bird's foot trefoil in that group as well. They're quite a nice one to start with, actually, I think. You have quite a lot of colour variation in the family. So you can split, get down to species by colour, and also they have their leaf variation is quite distinct. So some are trifoliate, some have a tendril, some not, and they also have some really wonderful stipules. So if you want to see stipules, go hunting for in the Pea family, because you'll definitely find some. If you're thinking, what on earth is she on about with stipules? There are some other families that are worth looking into. So the rose family is worth investigating. It is it's a really big family, and it doesn't just contain roses. It actually contains things such as apples, pears, blackberries as well. It's a very important economic family. Roses themselves can be quite difficult to identify because they do hybridize quite frequently. And never try and identify a blackberry beyond it's a blackberry. That group's actually what we call apomictic. So they produce seeds by asexual reproduction. So they produce seeds that are clones of the parent plant. They no longer require pollinating. And that means every time you get a bit of genetic variation occurring, a bit of a mutation, you end up with a new microspecies, and you have to be a real professional to try and identify blackberries. So I would say don't go there. And roses can be quite difficult as well for the opposite reason, in that they hybridize with each other. So you can often end up with hybrids between several species. The Asteraceae family. Oh, can everyone hear me okay? Are we okay? Yeah, lovely. Sorry, I had a little notification saying there was something wrong with my internet then. The Asteraceae family, these three plants here are all in the Asteraceae family. We've got an oxeye daisy, a corn marigold, and a corn chamomile. Those plants are a good group to get started with. So the yellow ones, the ones that are all yellow, can be quite difficult. They're what we call a difficult plant group, and that's because their major feature, the flowers, all look very similar. And you often have to refer to the fruit to identify them and tell them apart. An interesting point with the Asteraceae family is that they have two types of flowers. So this whole flower is actually an inflorescence. It is a group of several flowers. In the center, we have the disc flowers. So this has got many hundreds of tiny, tiny little yellow disc flowers in there. And along the edge, we have the ray florets. So each of these petals is the petal of one ray floret. And altogether, this makes what we see as one flower, but is actually an inflorescence. And that's very important to note in that family. You'll often, the first questions you get are, does it have all ray florets, or all disc florets, or a mixture of both? And then the second question you might get is, does it produce latex? So dandelions are in this family too. If you've ever picked a dandelion as a child, you might see at the bottom of the stem a kind of milky liquid comes out, and that's the latex that they're talking about. They don't all do it, but again, it's a diagnostic to split up different members of this family. Then we have the Lamiaceae, which is the mint family. They've got square stems. Good to have a look at those. If you have a feel of the stem and you feel that it's square, you've probably got the mint family, so that's a good place to start. I find them a little bit difficult to identify after that, because the petals of the flowers are quite small, and they are zygomorphic or irregular, and they can be quite easily confused with each other. We've got the orchids as well. We've got a lot of lovely terrestrial orchids in the UK. Again, they can hybridize, so they can be a little bit difficult. If you're ever somewhere in a meadow and you've got a couple different species of orchids, and then you've got an absolutely enormous stonking one, and you think, look at the size of that, that's probably a hybrid. And they get what they call hybrid vigor, which means that when the two species mix, the offspring are often more vigorous than the parents individually. They have irregular and zygomorphic flowers as well. And then we have the Scrophularia, or the figworts, which is a bit of a dumping ground family for other things that haven't fitted in elsewhere. So you often end up with Veronicas in that family. What else do we have? Figworts, and gosh, digitalis foxgloves. Foxgloves are in that family as well. They don't have any particularly identifying features for that family other than the flowers being irregular or zygomorphic, because it's a bit of a dumping ground family, things that don't fit in elsewhere. Quite often things are being moved out of this family now and put into new families, or if they find genetic analysis that they can fit them elsewhere. So how do you find out something if you've got absolutely no idea what it is? So you could ask a friend, maybe they know, but they might not know at all, or they might be wrong and you'll end up misidentifying something forevermore. You could go on a course. That's a very good idea. I would recommend going on a course if you want to get further into this. The Field Studies Council has some really excellent courses. You can ask on social media. Again, there are some really good wildflower groups on Facebook, but you might end up with a misidentification. Quite often, I do know some professional botanists who've come off a lot of the groups because they're often being told that they're wrong when they really know what they're talking about, and that can be a bit worrying when people are asking whether they can eat something or not. So if you want to eat something, I definitely wouldn't rely on identification from social media. But there is a kind of a group called Wildflower Hour that posts on a Sunday and encourages people to post pictures of wildflowers on social media, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. You can purchase guides that sort flowers by colour. That's very useful when you're first getting started and you don't recognise families, but there's a limit to how many pictures you can have in a guide, and also then you're stuck if flower colour is slightly different or the plant isn't flowering. You can speak to a county recorder. So a county recorder is somebody who is the premier identifier for a particular group in that region. So we have county recorders for plants, for butterflies, for bees, lichens, fungi, mosses, anything you want. The thing is, their position. So basically, if you've identified something, particularly if you think you found something very rare in the county that you're in, that record will go to the county recorder if you send it off through official channels, and they will double check that to make sure that you haven't misidentified it. So they're not generally available to help with simpler queries because they aren't paid. They do it entirely for the love of it, voluntarily, and they're a real wonderful resource. But unless they run a course, they probably won't be able to help with general things. So we've got apps and identification keys, and both of these are very effective. Some of you might use wildflower identification apps. The one that I like the most is one called PlantNet. There was a study done that found that PlantNet had a 94% accuracy rating, which is excellent. That's compared to a botanist. However, when people keyed out plants rather than, when people identified their plants with an app, they were much more likely to forget it very, very quickly than if they keyed it out and did the work themselves. So if you I tend to key things out, and then if I'm not quite sure, I might double check the identification on something like PlantNet. And the other thing is, if you've got difficult groups where the flowers often are similar, if you've got difficult groups where the flowers often look very similar, the app won't be able to tell difficult plant groups apart. So often the plants in the daisy family, don't come up very well on the apps, and things in the carrot family don't come up very well on the apps either. It's only groups where they've got very distinctive flowers that all the species are very different. So then we're on to identification keys, which are books, as I've spoken about earlier, books that you answer questions sequentially, and that gets you onto the species. Questions are usually in pairs, but they can be in more than pairs. And the reason they're called the key is I say that they unlock the answer that you're looking for, if I've been cheesy about it. So this is a little key here that we can go through for this red campion. So the key when looking at a key is to look very carefully, take your time and be thorough. You will often need a hand lens, which is a little magnifying lens to look at the features that they're talking about. So our first question here, so I've already decided that I've been through the key and I think this is a campion or a catchfly that I've got. Our first question is whether we have 5 styles or 3 styles. And the style are the female parts of the plant. And these little bits coming out here are the styles that are emerging from the female parts. On this flower, you can see the anthers or the stamens emerging, and those are producing the pollen. So you may not be able to see here if you're on a small screen, but they have 5 styles. So then we will go to question 2. And our next question, is our plant dioecious or is the plant bisexual? Now, this does seem like a bit of an invasive question, doesn't it? But dioecious means that if plants are dioecious or monoecious, dioecious means that the genders occur on different plants. So dioecious means 2 houses. So your couple, your male and your female, are living in separate houses. If it's monoecious, that means that the male and female parts of the flower are living in the same house or occurring in the same flower. Most flowers are monoecious or bisexual. They also call it bisexual sometimes. In this case, red campion is dioecious. You have male and female plants occurring separately. So then we would go to question number 3. And our next question is, are the flowers white with upright capsule teeth? So we don't have any images here of the capsule teeth, but that means when the plants go to seed. Or are the flowers red, brackets sometimes white, with the capsule teeth strongly recurved, which means bent back. So though we don't have the capsule teeth, we can see here that our flowers are red. It's called red campion. I mean, everybody says, why is it called that? It looks much more like it's pink to me, but it's definitely not white. This is actually a good question. In most good keys, you'll have 2 questions per line. And that means that if one of the things isn't very clear, for instance, here, we don't have a capsule because it's the wrong time of year, you can answer based on the other question. So we say flowers red, and that gives us our species Silene. It says S because they've already written Silene out earlier on the page, dioica. And that's dioica. It's the same as dioecious because the species is named after the fact that it has separate male and female plants. So that's just a little quick going through the key. So if you want to buy some resources and you don't know what to spend your money on, first of all, I would buy a hand lens. So that is a lens that enables you to magnify what you're looking at. All botanists and most entomologists, well, I would say all entomologists as well, will have one of these. Nobody can see the features that you need to see with the naked eye. You only need a ×10 hand lens, but I would recommend one with a 21 or 23mm aperture. It just means that the lens is wider. You can get a ×20, you can get up to ×30 hand lenses, but the problem is the higher up the magnification that you go, the smaller the area that will be in focus at any one time is. So it's best to go with the lowest magnification that you can. And these aren't too expensive. I think you can get an Opticron one for £15, or you can get some cheaper ones on eBay. Opticron are quite good though. If you want to get a really fancy one, there's you can get a triplet lens, not the brand triplet, a lens that is triplet means it has 3 different layers of glass, which makes the image much clearer, but they're very expensive. I don't have one, so a 10mm will be fine. And this is a selection of the kind of resources that I use most often. If you're a beginner and you only want to buy one book, I would say to buy The Wildflower Key by Frances Rose. It's a lovely book. It's got illustrations in, it's got a key and illustrations. That's important because sometimes you can get through the key, you think you've done your best, and then you look at the picture and you go, it's absolutely not that. I've gone totally wrong somewhere. A lot of people prefer the Collins Wildflower Guide. That's also got a key with illustrations. I don't, because I find that the Wildflower Key keys work much better. And also the Collins Wildflower Guide has grasses, sedges, rushes, and ferns in, which does mean it's more comprehensive. But I think generally, if you're a beginner, you're not going to be looking at grasses, sedges, rushes and ferns because they're a lot more complex. And that makes the book a lot heavier to carry around. So I prefer to have the Wildflower Key. It's a bit battered here because it knocks around my car all the time with me. The other book I would recommend buying is the Kew Plant Glossary. And each of these keys will have a glossary at the back, but the Kew Plant Glossary is much more comprehensive. It's got colour charts, any kind of description of the base of leaves, levels of hairiness. Any word that you might come across in these keys will be in the glossary, and that's only a thin book, but definitely worth having. So if you wanted to buy another one, if you were getting more serious, you might want to buy the New Flora of the British Isles by Clive Stace. So the Wildflower Key and the Collins Wildflower Guide have only got common plants in. They don't have absolutely everything that occurs, and they generally don't have things that have been introduced recently. So if you've got an invasive plant that you're likely to come across, it will be in there, but anything that only occurs occasionally may not be in there. The New Flora of the British Isles by Stace has every single plant that has ever been recorded in the British Isles keyed out in it. So when you do your grasses, the first question is basically, is it a bamboo? Because there are lots of bamboos, particularly down here in Cornwall, which is where I am, that have naturalised. But that book is an absolute monster. He does produce a compact version, which is being released soon for this edition, which has fewer descriptions in so that you can carry it around. But generally, that's the one to leave on the desk at home and take a smaller book out with you. Another excellent key is this Vegetative Key to the British Flora by John Poland and Eric Clement, which I spoke about earlier. And if you want to get a little bit more serious, this is a really fantastic book because we don't need flowers or fruit. And often some of these keys fall down because you need both flowers and fruit to get through the key. Often I will key something out in one of these other books, and then if I'm not sure, I'll go through the Vegetative Key as well. And if I get the same thing, then I know I am right. And lastly, these FSC fold-out guides are very, very useful. I still use them occasionally. They're very good. They do them by habitat. I've got one here, and they're much lighter and easier to carry around than some of the large books. So particularly if you're going out with children, it's something they can carry around as well. And they do them for all sorts of plants, and they do them for insects as well. And they even have one for cake, because the Field Studies Council is very well known for its cake. So if you want to identify your cakes from the Field Studies Council, they've got a key for it. So that's what you need, really. I would say hand lens, a copy of the Wildflower Key, and if you're feeling really flush, a copy of the plant glossary, and everything else can come later. And if you want to get involved beyond this point, which I'm hoping that you do, there's lots of organisations that you can get involved with. Obviously, Cumbria Wildlife Trust have got a lot of wildflower events coming up. And if you're not based in Cumbria, then Wildlife Trusts all across the UK have got a lot of excellent wildflower events. You could get involved with us at the Wildflower Centre if you're based in Cornwall. We're always looking for volunteers, and we go out on volunteer identification and seed collection days. Plant Life is a really excellent charity. They focus less on identification, but mainly on the preservation of wild plants. And they run this campaign, No Mow May, to encourage people to let their lawns grow in May. Identiplant is something, a course that runs over a year that you can pay for to get more in depth into botany. We also have Wildflower Hour on social media that I was talking about, 8 till 9 p.m. on Sundays. The Wildflower Society and Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland are much more focused on identification. And the National Plant Monitoring Scheme, that's a really excellent scheme where you sign up to monitor a square of land annually to collect data on how our plants are changing, and they offer quite a lot of free training as part of that if you sign up as well. So yes, that's a little introduction in how to get started in botany. I hope you feel a bit more prepared and not completely overwhelmed. So you don't have to remember it all. Just take that glossary out with you. Maybe pick a few things that you know what they are first. So maybe if you find a red campion that's still flowering now, you could go through the key and see if you can get to red campion. And that's a really great way to do it. Pick something that you already know. And often, if you're struggling, it's just that you need to get used to the language in the keys. It's not that you're necessarily doing anything really wrong. It's just that you aren't sure what they're meaning by what they're saying. So just persevere. But it can be really nice if you've got a local group. In Cornwall, we've got Botanical Cornwall, which is a group that you can go out with some really excellent botanists and learn your wildflowers. So yes, I see. Let's see if we've got any questions, shall we?
Thank you so much for that, Fern. That was absolutely fantastic. I feel like I've learned loads from that, so I'm probably going to have to watch this back and try and make some more notes. I am going to move on to a quick Q&A session in a sec. Just wanted to say two things before we do that. The first one is that our Barberhead farm site up near Ravenstonedale in Cumbria is open to the public this week. So if you wanted to go and wander through some wildflower meadows and test out some of your new knowledge, it would be a fantastic place to go. We do have some events coming up there as well. So if you want to check our event listings to see any particular events, please do. And the second thing I wanted to say is that we do have a membership offer at the moment. So if you join us by the end of the day tomorrow, so midnight tomorrow, we are sending out free concise wildflower guides with our membership packs, which are really handy. You can slip them in your pocket when you go out, and they've got about 180 species in there, I think. So would be really good if you are not already a member and you fancy becoming a member. Obviously, your membership will make a real difference to wildlife here in Cumbria, so please do consider it, and you get a free book, which is great. So it looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat. Please do continue to add them in if you like. I'll start at the top. So Marion has asked, is Angelica the same family as hogweed, i.e. it makes you sensitive to the sun?
Yes, it is the same family, but I don't believe that Angelica makes you sensitive to the sun. So not everything in that family does that, but that's particularly hogweed. But yes, it is in the APAC. Good family recognition there.
Marion's also asked, which was the group that asked to were sponsoring a square that you could go in?
Oh, National Plant Monitoring Scheme. That is NPMS. Yes, you monitor your square annually. They're randomised across the UK, and that was set up because they realised they don't have very good data on how habitats are changing and how plants are changing. But yeah, they're really great. Lots of resources. Really friendly bunch as well.
Somebody has asked, is iNaturalist useful for Plant ID? That's the one I use.
iNaturalist, yeah. Yeah, it can be. I tend to use iRecord because when you submit records through iNaturalist, at the moment they don't go to any record centres in the UK. iNaturalist is an American-based company or group, charity. I'm not sure what they are, but I tend to use iRecord, but iRecord won't identify for you. So if I need help, I'll key it out and use PlantNet and then submit a record on iRecord, and that will go to your local record centres. iNaturalist, I think, can be good. I don't know how good the camera recognition is, but I know there is a group of people that are identifying things. But again, just remember, if you're relying on somebody else for identifying, please don't eat anything.
We've got two questions about the membership offer, which I'll answer just quickly. Unfortunately, if you're already a member, we can't send you a copy of the book. It is an incentive that we've purchased for new members, and there are 15,000 members of Cumbria Wildlife Trust, which is absolutely fantastic. But if we wanted to send you all a book, that would be a lot of books, and we can't afford that. So I'm sorry, we can't send new books. Sorry, we can't send wildflower guides to everyone. And again, if you're a member of another wildlife trust, I'm sorry, we can't send you one either. I'd love to send them to everyone, but we can't. So I apologise for that. We've got another question from Catherine here. Are flower plant distributions changing due to climate change, for example, north-south?
Oh, that's interesting. You know, I haven't actually looked directly into that, but I would imagine that they are. So there are some plants that occur only. So Wales, Snowdonia, Northern Wales, is got some very rare plants there that are left over from the Arctic, from when there were glaciers in Wales, and they only grow at the tops of mountains now because that's the only place that it's cold enough for them. So as climate change occurs, plants probably will move, but that's part of what the National Plant Monitoring Scheme is trying to assess, because there hasn't been, people are very good at monitoring like migratory birds and things like that, but there hasn't been that focus in the same way on plants. So I imagine it will, but I can't give you a direct answer yet. Oh, you're muted.
I'm on mute. Sorry. Fantastic. If anybody wants to squeeze in a last question, please do so now. Otherwise, I'm just going to pop a link to the current membership offer in the chat, just in case anybody wants to join. We'd love to have you. And otherwise, I'll just say a massive thank you, Fern. That was absolutely fantastic. Really, really helpful and really in-depth and wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to speak to you.
Pleased to have you here. And it looks like it's still sunny outside if you're in Cumbria or if you're near me in Kendal. So I suggest you go outside and have a look at some wildflowers and use your newfound knowledge tonight. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.